Hello, this is Nate Covington, and the purpose of this video is to talk about various alternatives to the standard web hosting model. I've been building websites professionally for 20 some years now, and whether it's a WordPress or a Drupal or a Joomla site, they're all pretty much the same to me. They're all built using the same programming language, and they all run on the same type of server. So one of the sales pitches that I've given to my clients is, no matter where you want to host your website, I can work on it there. So I've got clients on Bluehost, on A2, GoDaddy, InMotion, SiteGround. There's just a ton of different web hosting companies that I can work with. So that's not really a limitation. I've even, told clients that they can host the website on a server that's running on their basement if they want to, and that was always kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing, but now I'm going to put my money where my mouth is and actually show how this works and kind of the proper way to set it up, at least from my perspective. So I'm going to pull up this diagram here that kind of shows the rough model of what we're going to get into today. We've got the internet at the top, we've got your house over here, we've got your regular data center, which is where your WordPress site would typically live, here in this block. But the purpose of this video is kind of what to do with that spare computer laying around your house. How do we connect that to the internet and make it, actually do some work for you? So the first way that I'm going to talk about is the way that I don't recommend doing it is called port forwarding. So I'm going to kind of switch gears and jump into that first. So I'm going to close a couple tabs just to clean this up. Okay, so port forwarding means that you basically sign into your router and you go into your advanced port forwarding, section here. I got to sign in again because it timed out. And what you would do is you would make a port, that you're going to forward, and you would punch in the local IP address of your, spare computer lying around, or whatever you want to call it. So we'll just call this, 17, for example. And when you add the ports here, you can see it maps port 80 to that local computer inside my house. And the way that it would work is you would jump into your DNS manager, and I think I'm just going to type in cloud. If I go into the DNS manager and you need to make a record for your app or for your website, this is where you would make the subdomain record here. And what you would do under port forwarding is you would put your cable modem's IP address into the record here. So whether you're Comcast or Verizon, I guess a fiber optic modem if it's different than a cable modem. Either way, you take your IP address from your personal internet connection, which is here, and you plug it into your DNS here. And that way, when somebody goes on the internet and says, "Where is this app?" the internet's going to come back and say, "Oh, it's at your house, and here's the IP address." So the reason that I don't like this setup is it's opening up a security hole in your router here, and I'm going to delete this because I don't want this. I don't want that in there. You don't want port forwarding turned on your router, because that is a security risk by itself. It basically, from the internet's perspective, not only are you telling everybody your IP address, you're basically leaving the door open so that people can get into your network and attack that computer located at 17. And then once the hacker gets control of 17, then they've got access to your whole network. So that's why I don't recommend port forwarding. I think it's very dangerous. If I was going to try to roll it out in production, what I would try to do is call up my local internet service provider and order a second cable modem so that I could run a totally isolated network just for self-hosting. So this is not going to be a good solution from my perspective here. All right, in the second part here, I'm going to talk about Yunohost, which is I think how you pronounce it. Um, so there's a few different ways that we can set this up. So I'm going to kind of dig into it here for a minute. Okay. So under Yunohost, I'm on the documentation page for different ways to install it. And the way that they're kind of breaking it down here, let me back this off a little bit because it's too big. The way that they're breaking it down here is that you've got three options. You can do it at home using port forwarding, like I talked about before. You can do it at home using a VPN to kind of cloak your IP address. And then there's the third option, which is where you load the Yunohost onto a VPS in the data center. So there's kind of mixing up the different options here, but I'm going to try to make sense of it with you here. Obviously, the one at home is where the physical machine is running in your office or in your house, and then in the data center is the third option here. So the way that it works is you've got a bunch of different options. The two that I'm really going to look at are the two here, regular computer and the remote server. So the regular computer way that you would install it is you have a computer sitting in your office, and you basically download this installer and you format that computer and you totally start it over with the Yunohost software. So it includes the operating system, and the whole thing is self-contained. It basically wipes the computer and just dedicates it just to doing this hosting, which I think is fine. I wouldn't do it any other way. You need to have a dedicated computer for this if you're going to do it at all. So a couple different ways to get into it. I'm not gonna actually go through the installation process because there's plenty of those videos, but you start the install in a terminal, and then you jump over to a browser and you finish the installation. You make a user. One of the things that we want to point out here is the port forwarding. This pretty much relies on port forwarding. So this is if you're hosting at home without a VPN, you need to forward ports on your home router, which is that security risk that I talked about before. And so that basically lets your router point all the traffic at the Yunohost machine sitting in your office, which is great. Obviously I don't like the idea of opening ports in general, but if some people might think it's an okay risk, and that's it, I'm not going to stop them, obviously. The way that I would recommend doing it is, it looks like you can sign up for a third-party DNS service where you can get a dedicated IP address from this third-party provider. You go onto your Yunohost machine and you set up the VPN on that computer, and then you tie it in with your cloud service here that costs $55 a year. And what that allows you to do is, when you go to add your DNS records, you come in here, and instead of putting in your home IP address, you put in the IP address that you get from your DNS provider for $55 a year. So that's where spending the $55 a year will kind of let you have your cake and eat it too. It's a really neat setup. I think I don't have any particular issues with it. The deal breaker for me was I wanted something more that I had more control over it. This Yunohost gives a whole dashboard of things that I just don't need. I'm trying to find it here while I fumble with the video. Alright, so here's the administrator panel I was fumbling to find. Under Yunohost, you can see it has all these different areas for users and domains, applications. There's a whole bunch of backup, all sorts of stuff in here that it does, which is great. I just didn't want all the bells and whistles for myself here, which is why I continued moving while I was looking for a proper setup. Kind of dig into these two options real quick. I want to show I'd already shown how the regular computer works. Now if you have a remote server, and you're doing this in a data center, this is a really nice way to use Yunohost because you're not exposing anything on your local network. It's all running in a data center. So what you do is you start out with the Debian 11 machine in the data center, and and you install the Yunohost on top of it, which is a little bit different when you have your regular computer. You format it using the entire installer because you can get your hands on the physical computer itself. When you're doing it on the VPS, you have it install Debian first, and then you run your command to install Yunohost on top of it. So they're pretty much the same animal, once you kind of get through the initial setup there. One thing that you'll see about Yunohost and the overall complexity of it is it doesn't just host one app or one website. It has this whole ecosystem that goes with it. So you can see it actually handles email here with your MX records and all sorts of other stuff that you can set up in your DNS if you want to. So I think that's all I've got to say about Yunohost at the moment. Alright, the next part is going to talk about this reverse proxy concept, and I've got two of them that I'm going to walk through. The first one is the Self-Hosted Gateway. So I'll just kind of talk about them for a minute here. It's a piece of software that was developed by this company called Fractal, and I really like these guys. They're very helpful in their forums and stuff. They gave me a ton of hand holding, so I'm really appreciative to those guys. They have a neat concept here where you can purchase a piece of hardware to run in your house, and then if you go into their console, it has a dashboard where you can basically set up your apps and use, very similar to other concepts here, where you have the actual hardware sitting in your office, and then the dashboard here is where all the connections are made to the individual apps. So it's a really neat ecosystem. The way that I decided to do it, though, was I bypassed their console and I went right to GitHub, where they have their self-hosted gateway available to people who want to totally run it themselves. And this is so I'll just kind of go through some of the steps in setting it up, and we'll kind of dig into it here. So the first thing that you need to do is you set up a VPS in a data center. It's going to cost you about $5 a month, roughly comparable to the DNS provider that I talked about previously. So this is just like a $3 or $4 or $5 a month server that's running in the cloud. And what we do is I'm on that computer here now. This is the terminal window for the self-hosted gateway, and I'll just clear this and I'll do a printout of all the Docker containers that we have here. So you can see I've got a whole bunch of, this is a WordPress site, here's a Matrix server, here's an Element chat app, a bunch more WordPress sites. You get the idea. You can run as many different apps on this system as you want to. And what you do is you go into your DNS management, where you have your zone, and this is where you create your IP address, and you use the IP of that VPS in the cloud. Alright, so we'll go back to the installation. I'll just kind of paraphrase some of this stuff. Alright, so this is where we're talking about what you do in the actual server in the cloud, so that we already kind of fast forwarded through all this. And then I showed you the resulting Docker containers on the other side of it, so I'm not going to go through the full installation here. I'm just kind of try to go through this and give a high level. So on the local machine now, I'm going to jump into my remote desktop area and actually sign into this local machine where this is set up, but you get the general idea here. You make this command here where you tell it where your app is being hosted from and what container and what port you want to expose. And then it comes back and it gives you this piece of text here for you to copy into your app. So I'm going to jump into my computer here and actually show it. Alright, so it went to sleep. I'll wake it up. Alright, so in this computer now I've got Docker, the same type of output that I had before, where it shows the apps, but these are the ones that are on the local machine here. These are the actual containers. And then if I run Docker PS again, now you can see it actually created this link up here. In the first one there was no link, so when you add that link from the Self-Hosted Gateway, oops, wrong file, Docker Compose. Alright, so here is your standard, WordPress Docker Compose file, which is how you would run WordPress locally. And then here's that link where they give you, the snippet to include here. And what this does is when you run the actual command here, I'll jump over and I'll pull up my history because this is some of the actual commands that I ran. So here's the command that said make the link to WordPress, and then on the server side, here's that corresponding WordPress connection in the server. So that's kind of how it works, is you've got a container on your local machine and a container on the cloud server that talk to each other, and that's over a WireGuard connection. That's this WG stands for WireGuard in this configuration here. So that's kind of how the self-hosted gateway works, is you go into your local machine, into the terminal, and you run this make link command, and then it comes back and lets you connect it. So then once they're up and running, I'll show you. Here's the WordPress site here. I'll just refresh it and we'll jump back over to this, and I'm going to say Docker Compose down. And you can see it's removing and stopping all these containers here. Let's give it a sec because it's taking its time. Alright, now if I go back over to the web browser, you'll see that the connection failed. It's not working. And I come back over here, Docker Compose up, D for detached, or daemon. Alright, and now the site's up and running again. Same concept with the other containers. If I do that same thing for element, that's here. I have an uptime Kuma here, which is this link. And I've also got a Synapse server, which is matrix. That's this one here, Synapse. Okay, so there's just a bunch of different servers that I've got running on one little, this is a particular machine is a Mac Mini that I'm running this off of. Alright, so I'm pretty sure that's all I wanted to show you on the self-hosted gateway. No, I'm sorry, there's one more. Okay, so there's a bug in here that I found, and the bug looks like this. If you go into your cloud computer here with all of the container links in it, and you reboot this machine, it actually loses all these connections here. There's some bug in their code where these port numbers are randomly generated when the command is run, and then when the server reboots, you need to go back through and recreate the links. So that didn't seem like a good a good way to run a system to me. They're aware of the bug, so hopefully they'll get this fixed pretty soon. But in the meantime, I have another one to talk about, which is the boring proxy. So I'm going to cut this off now. I think I'm done with the self-hosted gateway. Yeah. Alright, the last part of this video is going to talk about the boring proxy, which is the one that I've decided to use. So I'm going to show you the boring proxy and, kind of under the hood. And then when I'm done this video, I'm going to shut down all my servers and kind of wipe them and start over. So all the keys and passwords and stuff that I showed in this video aren't going to do you any good if you're trying to hack it. So, all right, here we go. We're going to go back to the boring website and just look through what the boring proxy is. They have a nice video that kind of talks through what it is and what it does. So I'm just going to, I guess I'll just go right into my DNS manager and kind of show you, from the ground up again. So what I did was I have a subdomain called boring and a different IP address. This is actually running on a Linode server. And then I have this catch-all subdomain for all the apps that run underneath it. So if I go back to my screen sharing now, I've got another computer that I'm going to show you. This is an old laptop that I've got running on the desk behind me, and I guess what I'll do is I'll show you the server in the cloud first. So this is the server that's running the boring proxy, and what I'll do first is I'm just going to run a Docker output just to show you there are no containers running on this server. It's totally run natively on the operating system. If I do an ls here, I loaded the service into this folder so that it runs when the computer boots. So if I do a nano boring proxy.service, we can see the configuration here. What it does, there's only 2 lines that you need to worry about. You show it the directory that the app is running in, or that the file rather, and then you tell it, okay, this is the nice part about the boring proxy is it's the same app, or it's the same plugin or a piece of software or whatever you want to call it, whether it's the client or the server. So you'll see this command only differs slightly between the server in the cloud and the part that runs on your computer. So here it is. It runs the boring proxy script. It tells it, okay, you're the server, the one in the cloud, and then here's the admin domain. We tell it to focus on boring as the subdomain, and that's all that it needs. So now that service is running on the background on this computer. This computer can reboot. It doesn't have that bug like I saw in the other reverse proxy. So here's the actual front end now. When you install the boring, script and you get it running, you come to this dashboard here, after you put your password or your token in, and each time you go to make a new app, you go to add tunnel, you give it a app name, etc., give it a port and a number, but all of the tunnels are here, the ones that I had set up previously, so this will look kind of similar to the last one. So let me go back. Here's the, I guess I'll just show it again on the client side, because I just showed the server. I'll do the same thing here for the client. Boring proxy.service, and here it is on the again, this is on the computer running in my office here. Tell it the folder again, and this time, instead of being the server, we're going to tell it, okay, you're the client, and the server that you're going to report to is boring, and then it needs a token. We're not just going to let anyone. So this is basically like a password. The token is what tells the cloud server to pay attention to this client. And the client name here is XPS. That's just the name of this computer. And the user is admin, because that's the only admin or the only user that I have set up in there so far. But if you wanted to have, you know, friends and family connect to this thing, you could create a different user for, you know, John Doe, and then, you know, on John's computer you could give him, you know, his own username so that he can run his app off of his local computer, and everyone shares that the cost of the VPS. So you could actually have, you know, 5 or 10 different people connecting their home servers to one VPS using this setup. I think it's pretty nice here. All right, so I'll exit out of that. That is what runs the boring service on the actual computer here. Okay, so now if I go back and do a Docker PS, you can see the 3 containers that I've got. 2 are for a WordPress site. There's that Kuma one again. So the big difference now is that with this boring proxy, you don't need to do any Docker Compose configuration for the apps. That's done in the web browser, like I showed you over here, where you add your tunnel and ports and stuff. So if we go to WordPress and then Docker Compose down, you'll see it's stopping these containers, and this is going to break. Whoopsie. Okay. Docker Compose up D. All right, there it is working again. And same deal with the Kuma. CD time Kuma. Docker Compose down. This will shut down Kuma. You can see it's already given an error message, but here it's going to fail. And then if I do a Docker Compose up D, it'll recreate the containers, and this should be working. Great. So that is how the boring proxy works. I think this is the one that I'm going to actually run with here. I'm pretty happy with it. The only other thing I wanted to show you while I'm kind of talking about Docker Compose and kind of keeping your hands on your data is if you go into your actual Docker Compose file, you can see the volumes and the way they get mounted. Let me see here. Yeah, see this volume here? What you can do is if you want the information to be accessible to the operating system, like right now the database and the files are all running in the actual container itself. It's isolated from your host computer here. So what we can do is I'm going to go and tell the Docker Compose that I want the actual database and the public folder for WordPress to be right here on the computer. So if I save this, I'm going to go back to WordPress now. Docker Compose up D. You can see it created the folders now. If I go in and look at the WP data, this gives you your standard WordPress files now. So if you want to work on your theme or whatever files you want, it's right here. And the nice part is you can back these up pretty easily too. So now that you can get your hands on the database, you can get your hands on the files, now it's pretty trivial to back these up. So that's why I like this system here. I think it's going to work pretty well. So I'm excited to actually start using it in production. I think that's the end of my video. Thanks for watching.